Willie Simmons' status as the head coach of FAMU is not only the biggest unknown heading into the new year, it's also the biggest variable in HBCU athletics heading into 2024. Oh, yeah, it's Locked On HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me, making this your first listen of the year, first listen of the day, every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off doesn't mean the journey's over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more when you go to FanDuel.com/locked-on. And if you're new to FanDuel and win your first $5 moneyline bet, you get $150 back in bonus bets. That's $150 back to you if your team wins. Now, we're going to look forward into 2024 because we are here January 1st. 2024, but then we're also going to take a step back and look at the last 365. And I have the two biggest storylines, or the ones that stuck with me the most heading into 2023. Let me know what your favorite storyline from this past calendar year was, right? I'm not just talking about football season. I'm not just talking about that kind of year. The whole calendar year. What was your favorite or most memorable storyline from 2023? But first, we're going to take a look at Willie Simmons, because Willie Simmons' status as the head coach of FAMU is by far the biggest unknown. It's the biggest variable when it comes to HBCU athletics. Now, a big part of that statement comes with the fact that there is no bigger sport, but then also he one of the top coaches, if you don't want to say the top coach in HBCU football, right? This affects FAMU. This affects another team within the conference. And then more broadly, this affects all of HBCU athletics. And I'm not exaggerating, but we'll go level by level as we look at it. But let's start off with the school, because there's no more important entity than FAMU when it comes to this. Losing Willie Simmons at the time that you're losing him would be a devastating blow, because I feel as if Willie Simmons, no, they don't roll over the whole talent. They're not just rolling over the same team, kind of similar to how North Carolina Central did after their Celebration Bowl victory. But Willie Simmons has gone through multiple iterations of FAMU and has continuously had success. This is just the first time that it's resulted in not a Super Bowl, a Celebration Bowl championship. That's the only difference. But this guy has established so much continuity, so much consistency when it comes to the Rattlers. And you will be losing one of, if not the best head coach in Black college football. So from a school standpoint, it's clear and obvious how impactful that this is. You don't want to lose Willie Simmons, because you're losing a guy who, when you hear him talk, you understand the football mind that makes him sought after. But then also when you hear him talk, you hear the leadership that makes him a good coach. It's not just about X's and O's and understanding the game. It's about leading men, because you're going to continuously have new recruiting cycles. You're bringing in 17-year-old kids sometimes. Some of these kids are 17-year-olds. So with that being the case, you have to be a fantastic leader. And every time you hear Willie Simmons speak, you hear why he is. Now they would have to go look at a new head coach. Just to run it back real quick, for those who maybe haven't been up to date, maybe you didn't catch the end of last week, right? Because 2023 went out crazy. FAMU's head coach is now being looked at for that Duke University, the Duke University running back coach position. I don't think that he should go to it. I don't want him to go to it. Those are two different things, but I believe both to be true. But where we stand now is it's up in the air. We're not sure what he's going to do. And that is why this is an unknown commodity, why this is such a big variable. It's kind of hot. Let me take this jacket off. But yeah, so now that's where you get FAMU into play. But if he does leave, FAMU is going to need a new head coach. Now, maybe it's Ed Reed, but maybe it's Fred McNair. And that's where the other school comes in. I think that this situation with FAMU and Willie Simmons, while it's unknown, should light a fire underneath Texas Southern. And I don't say this just to make this all about me, but we would have to assume that Fred McNair would at least be in consideration for that FAMU job. And maybe as soon as it opens, Fred McNair says that's a better job. So if I were Texas Southern and I were on Team McNair, because we know it's a split, I will be getting into meetings and saying, we need to lock this guy up now because we don't know what's going to happen with Willie Simmons. And I think objectively speaking, they should probably know that FAMU looks a little bit more appealing than Texas Southern. So not only does Willie Simmons' departure affect his team, it could also affect TSU with their selection process with their coach. So it all comes into play. Now, of course, you might have those guys who are on Team Johnson saying, all right, we're going to wait him out because then Fred McNair might go to FAMU and we're going to end up getting a blessing. Y'all don't even know it's a blessing in disguise. You just don't realize it at this moment. It's a lot of things. So that's FAMU, Texas Southern. But now the SWAC is not the only team that is, or not the only entity as far as conferences that go, that are being affected. You also have to look at the HBCU landscape as a whole. Losing a prominent head coach would be a big deal. This is a coach who has been sought after for multiple seasons. This is a coach who has been, his name is floated around in multiple levels. I've seen his name float around as a head coach. I've seen his name float around as a position coach, right? And this is not only one of your best coaches, this is one of your best leaders. This is one of the faces. I think that he could be the face of HBCU coaching, him and Trey Oliver. To me, those are the two guys who I look at. I'm like, y'all could be the face of this right now. And this isn't even about the team success. It's about who they are as people. When I look at Willie Simmons and I look at Trey Oliver and I look at the attitude that they bring, when I look at the personality and when I look at the skill set, right, all of those things go into play. I could see those being two of the faces of late 2010s, early 2000 HBCU football. I could see them being the faces of 2020 HBCU football as a decade. I genuinely could. So I do believe that this is a huge blow because you're losing a potential pillar of the sport in Willie Simmons. This is one of the biggest unknowns. It's one of the biggest variables, but it's something that we have to watch, and it should be decided very early. We'll get into some of the other things to watch on tomorrow's episode, but right now I wanted to go with the biggest because it's the first day of the year, and Willie Simmons' status as the head coach of FAMU is by far the biggest storyline to watch heading into 2024. Now, as we push forward, I actually want to take a look back. I have two storylines in particular that I had a lot of interest in from the past 365 days, and we'll kind of stay in Florida for both of them. But we'll first off stay in Tallahassee because the FAMU championship was probably my favorite storyline of 2024, and we'll explore it as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. And maybe 2024 is your year that you want to get into this, right? You say, you know what? I want to put some more money down. I want to try to see test myself. Well, go to FanDuel.com/locked on, and that means that you're new to FanDuel. If you're going with this situation, you're new to FanDuel. Put a $5 moneyline bet down, and if you win, you get $150 back in bonus bets. That means if your team wins, you get $150 back to you. So that's just some of the many benefits that you get from going to FanDuel, and you get that one if you're new. So go to FanDuel.com/locked on. The NFL season is about to come to the close, but NBA is still rolling. NHL is just starting, right? Let's diversify. Let's get into any and everything when you go to FanDuel.com/locked on. That's FanDuel.com/locked on. Make every moment more. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day. Every day, I'm glad you made it home safe from a night out with New Year's. Maybe you spent it in the house, maybe you went somewhere, but you were able to do it. And as soon as you got home, you could have put on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 stream all day, every day. No matter when you check it, there will be something playing first of its kind. Go to Locked On Sports Today and subscribe. Now, I want to look at some of the biggest storylines that are in HBCU athletics from 2023. And I'm looking at the state of Florida, both in this one and the next one. But for right now, I'm looking at FAMU's championship, the first Celebration Bowl championship in school history. To me, this is the biggest storyline of 2023 because, like I said with Willie Simmons, this is the biggest sport in HBCU athletics. And it was a nice one to go with it. So for years, almost the entirety of the Celebration Bowl's history, you've seen FAMU be close. You've seen them be close for a couple of years in the MEAC. You've seen them be close the first 2 years they had in the SWAC, right? This is year, and they won this year. So you're saying 6-1 before that, they were close 4 years. So over half of the time that over half of the time that the Celebration Bowl has been in existence, you've seen FAMU be close, whether it was self-imposed, right, bans, and you had the best record, but you couldn't get in because of that, or if it was you were one game away, or you were close but no cigar, and you lost a game at the beginning of the season to just so happen to be the best team in the conference that year. All of those things come into play, but they all lead to a common thing, and it's something that I watched as we were going on through the entirety of the football season. I never let up on this. And it was something where I didn't think that Jackson State was the hurdle. I thought that Jackson State just was another kind of, it was an object that represented the same problem, but it keeps looking different, right? A barricade, a hurdle, a freaking limbo bar, like anything. You had to go over it. All three of those things are different, but they all represent the same thing. You couldn't get high enough. You couldn't get over whatever was in front of you. And it was always something different. It was always something different. And in the past 2 seasons, it just so happened to be Jackson State. So it almost had this stigma that FAMU just couldn't get it done. It was almost a stigma that no matter what, something was going to be in the way of FAMU. And you know what? That stigma was dissolved this past year. This was a stigma that I think was real. And I haven't been here through all of it, covering it on the show. I've been here for the Jackson State FAMU situation. And quite frankly, I don't know if that was the best example of it. There was a year, I think 2018, I think 2 years before the pandemic, right? I think that they were like really close and they just end up fumbling at the end of the year. That was a really bad situation, or it was just a variety of things. Let's just put it like that. They overcame all of that and they took away a stigma, an idea that FAMU couldn't get to the game. Bye-bye. They got to the game and they won the game. And I thought they won the game in emphatic fashion. I thought that the defense was great. I thought that the defense was dominant, actually. I thought that Jeremy Musa stepped up his play in the last 30 minutes of the game. I thought you had unheralded heroes such as Kamara Young. I thought you had heroes you didn't expect but were very prominent, such as Dean, right? You're looking at these guys, and it just was a full story. It was kind of like it almost felt like a Rocky movie. It almost felt like a fighter's movie where, you get knocked down and you're fighting your way up this whole time. You're fighting this way up the whole time to the last battle, the last fight of the movie. And you finally come up victorious. And now it's like, I've done it. It felt like Creed to me. You know what I mean? It felt like Creed 1, where he couldn't get into the ring Creed 1, he couldn't get in the ring. He ended up getting knocked out. It was like that. This was almost movie-esque when you look at what FAMU was able to do this season. I loved it. I thought that it was very fun to track. I thought that you add in how they changed their schedule. You could tell the attitude was Celebration Bowl or bust. We don't even care about the playoffs anymore because we feel like we were done wrong by them the year prior. So that's no longer something that's even in our brain. There were so many things There were so many things that came into play for FAMU to be able to get to where they got to. And I was able to be here every step of the way and keep track of it. And for me, that was something that was immensely fun, immensely entertaining. It was something that I don't know if anybody else could do it like that. That's a very specific storyline. Maybe something else that would be very entertaining. But for FAMU to be able to watch their journey for at least the past 3 seasons and really track it and see the culmination of it all, especially how it happened, I thought that was the best storyline of 2023. And I'm a football guy, so that's why I loved it. But as we move forward, we have one that it's not the greatest storyline, but for me, it was extremely funny and it was extremely memorable. And it's Ed Reed in the HBCU coaching fiasco and why that was a storyline that stuck out and continues to stick out as we continue with Locked On HBCU. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day. Every day, making it all the way to segment 3, and I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. We kicking off 2024 with a bang. 2023 went out with a bang, and we ain't done. We still rolling all the way through this calendar year, and we starting at number 1. Now, with that being said, we've looked at the biggest storyline heading into 2024, the biggest unknown variable, however you want to describe it. That's Willie Simmons. We looked at Florida A&M, and we looked at their route to the championship and everything that came in kind of a part of it. We looked at that. But the other big time storyline that stuck with me, and maybe I just like the drama, I don't know. Maybe I'm looking at the fact that this player was one of my favorite players growing up, and now he had a chance to be a person that I covered in my adult life. I don't know. But Ed Reed and the HBCU coaching fiasco was one of the most entertaining, frustrating, and memorable storylines from 2023. And tomorrow we'll look more into the future. I don't want to just reflect. But this one is kind of one that was going on in 2023 and kind of continues heading into 2024. So it's almost a hybrid. It almost fits in both categories. And in a way, all 3 of these things line up. Willie Simmons' status is unknown heading into 2024. But they're coming off of a Celebration Bowl victory. Maybe that made him even more desirable to somebody like Manny Diaz, even though they have a relationship. Maybe that championship that he won with FAMU was a big deal. And then this is connected because Ed Reed has been reported as somebody they would look at to replace Simmons if he were to depart. It all goes together. It all goes together, and it's all very interesting. And the reason that, quite frankly, I like this storyline is because everybody thought it was over. Everybody thought that this was over. Like, for everything that happened with Ed Reed and Bethune-Cookman being hired and fired in a matter of a couple of weeks, he might have got hired in the end of December, but the most of the story happened in December. And I know technically he wasn't hired. That's why they were the fire. But forget the technicalities. The man was hired and fired. Like, we know he was the coach and then he wasn't the coach. Hired and fired, right? And we should probably take a look at Bethune-Cookman's recruiting as well. But for everything that happened at the beginning of 2023 with Ed Reed, I thought that we were done hearing about him with coaching for a long time. And then we get to the end of 2023. First off, he kept talking. He kept throwing like little comments out there, not disses, but just comments out of there. And I was like, you know what? We just need to let that go. Because I'll never be apologetic about it from a football standpoint, because I don't know the man personally, and I don't know much about the man personally. I loved Ed Reed, the football player. I did. He was one of my favorite players as a young kid. I'll never be apologetic about that. But I'm able to remove that love for him as a player, the admiration I have for him as a player, because now we're talking about him as a coach and him as a person. Who he was as a player don't affect those two things. It's more so the person than the coach. But I looked at that situation and said, all right, we need to let that go. Let that go, Ed, right? Because I don't want to be put in a position where I got to look at you sideways, because I don't. But then we come back at the end of the year, Grambling, Texas Southern, maybe FAMU now, and he's still being connected. He goes up there, and I know a lot of people get upset. Like, man, just leave us alone. He doesn't want to. I think this is something he wants to do, but I thought we seen the last of him. I thought that we were done with Ed Reed, but then we hear him being connected to Grambling. We hear him connect himself to Texas Southern, and now we even hear him get connected to FAMU. That's what makes this great for me, is that this is a movie that we thought was over, was a standalone. And then a while later, they say, oh, yeah, we're going to give you a sequel to this. This is almost like Avatar, entertaining than a mug at the beginning. When it first dropped, oh, my gosh, what's going on? Ed Reed, like this, it was crazy. The fiasco around it, the dramatics around it, everything was like, oh, my God, right? And then it was dead silent for all of 10 months. And then, boom, you give me Avatar 2, and I don't really even know how I feel about it. That's Ed Reed now. I don't know how I feel about Ed Reed to Grambling, how I feel about Ed Reed to Texas Southern, how I feel about Ed Reed to Florida A&M. I'm not sure how I feel about him to these places. But in a weird storyline-centered way, I'm very entertained. And on tomorrow's episode, we'll be looking at the Black college football finalist who I would pick for Player of the Year. It hasn't been named yet, but who I would pick. You only get 4 options, and I'd pick who my 4 would be, and then I'll figure out something else for the rest of the show. But we'll for sure look at that. I just have a couple of options on my table, so I can't tell you exactly what everything will be. But in the meantime, in between time, thank you for starting off your year with Darian Gray, the mouth of the South, and Locked on HBCU. In the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.